Hey, welcome to another episode. Today I'm going to interview Dr. Yug Varma, the founder of Phyla. Phyla is revolutionizing the acne treatment industry with cutting-edge technology and innovative solutions. Hey, Yug, thanks for being on the show.
Hey Brian, so great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. So why don't you start introducing yourself so the audience can get to know you a little bit better?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Yug. I am the founder of Phyla, and we're really a biotech company in the consumer health, in the skincare space. My background is I'm a scientist. So I got my PhD from Johns Hopkins, did a postdoc at UCSF, and spent really a decade in academia before I jumped ship and started this company. And I've been doing microbiome research for about 13, 14 years at this point. Um, the the reason that I kind of chose to start this startup was that I was in a really exciting field, the field of microbiome research, one that I'm sure many of your listeners have heard about, and one in which there was a lot of innovation and discoveries coming, rapidly. And I was really excited by them. But then I realized that, the point of science is to discover something and move on and work on something else. But what I really wanted to do was to translate some of the cool discoveries, insights that we were getting into a product, into a thing that people could purchase or use or that could impact their daily life. And so I realized that doing the startup was probably the best way to do that. And so here I am.
It's amazing. So I I know you a few months ago partnered up with Shiseido, which is a leader skincare brand. I think it's in Japan. Correct me if I'm wrong.
You're right.
Okay, so first off, congrats on that. That must be really big for you guys. So, can you share, please, more about how this partnership came about and what it means for Phyla?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the background on Shiseido, most people have heard that name. It's a really big Japanese sort of skincare giant. And in skincare specifically, right, a lot of really cutting edge technology and the latest sort of next gen ingredients and products come from Japan and Korea, that part of the world. So, we're really excited to have them as our partner, have them on our cap table and on our on sort of our around the table as we make decisions moving forward. I think from their point of view, they're really interested in obviously technological innovation. That's what kind of keeps their noses in front. And we knew that they were interested in the microbiome because they had bought another smaller microbiome company called Galenet. It's a French company that had been an early pioneer of kind of microbiome products. So we had a really, cool sort of diligence process where we presented them our data. They asked a bunch of really intelligent questions. And often when, you're doing diligence and the other side asks questions, especially for like a technological or a biotech company like ours, it, at least to me, it's quite evident early on the what the mindset is, right, of the other party, of like how they view our technology, what they find is valuable in it. Because yes, we have the skincare business side of it, which is very valuable, but the patents, the technology that's underlying also has a huge amount of value. And we see that long term, that's going to drive the value in our business. So, I mean, they saw that right away, and it was so easy to kind of talk to them about this kind of stuff. We were on the same wavelength for a lot of these things. So I'm really excited to have them on our side. I know that we've already, found a lot of value in interacting with them, getting their input on a bunch of critical things. And as we move ahead, I think their involvement is going to be even more and more important.
Okay, so you mentioned patents, right? So I understand you have multiple ones. Could you please briefly explain why it's important for, the listeners who own a business that are looking to applying for a patent? Why is it important for them to get the patent for what they are building? And what are the key steps in the process?
Yeah, I mean, I think patents are obviously a very important value creating tool, but they're also a strategic asset, right? And I mean, I'm sure you have a variety of listeners across a number of cross sections listening to this. But for a lot of people who are, have D2C businesses or are in e-commerce or are in that area, for a large number of them, patents probably don't make sense. The reason they made sense for us is because we're a biotech company. And so, for example, if we were so we're in the acne space, right? Just wanted to kind of inform your listeners. Um, and a lot of companies in the acne space are brands that have great products and have a great brand presence, but they're all kind of similar to each other when it comes to the ingredients, right? They have the same actives, they have the same ingredients, and it's kind of the brand. So there you focus really heavily on the brand building and the customer discovery and the community building. Those things are really, really important. Not to say that they're not important for us, but we have this other dimension to our company, which is the underlying technology where we're bringing something completely new to the market, right? So the first was how do we develop that technology and develop a moat around it, like a scientific moat where we're so advanced that no one can catch up to us in a meaningful way. The second was to build an IP moat where it would discourage anyone from even competing in this space so that we could have a little more breathing room. And we did that by obtaining a patent on our technology. And we use, the way ingredients are regulated in this space and so on to fashion this patent. But essentially, what it allows us to do is to use our technology, which is phage technology, exclusively in acne. Obviously, that's very powerful and it's kind of unique or very unusual in the skincare space where you say, hey, I have a patent on a technology or an ingredient that no one else can use for so many number of years. Because most companies, big ones, small ones, are always building a brand, but they're always looking over their shoulder. So when they become big enough and successful enough, someone else will say, hey, they did this, let's copy this template and do it, right? So you've got hims and hers and apostrophe and that compounding kind of model that started probably 10, 12 years ago, and now has many players, some have consolidated. But with a patent, you can kind of wipe the slate clean, you can kind of wipe the field and be the only person standing. And then it's incumbent upon you to make a valuable enough brand and a technology that having that patent is worth it. And I guess the last thing I'll say is that anyone can get a patent, but all patents aren't worth the money you spend on them or the time you spend on them. You have to have something that can be enforced and that would actually exclude someone. Because the USPTO will give you a patent on any novel, non-obvious idea. But part of your strategy has to be, once I have this patent in hand, how does it prevent others from infringing on my technology in a meaningful way? And it could be a small but very painful way that you make it high cost for anyone to enter and compete with you in this space. And that's fine, but you've got to figure out what your kind of what's called a prosecution strategy is.
Very amazing. And how long does it take, more or less, from the moment you applied to the moment you get the patent? If the process goes smoothly, let's say, without any, I don't know if there are things like objections from companies or things like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's different kind of tracks you can take, right? The track that we took initially, because we're a startup starting from scratch, I was leaving academia, funding was tight. We started off actually with an NIH grant, right? So we did a lot of work on the science piece. We wanted to file our IP, and it's really right now the US and pretty much the rest of the world is in what's called a first to file kind of mode of operation, which basically means that the first person to file, the earliest date you can file your patent, that is the person that gets priority, and that's the person that invariably gets the patent, right? And so if you're like, oh, I know there are some other teams with competing ideas, you want to patent your product or your idea as soon as possible. Once you patent it, most often you'll do what's called a provisional patent, which means that from the date so today is the 21st, if today you file a patent, 21st May 2024, for about a year, you get time to kind of work on that patent, get additional data, and you can add that to your patent. But essentially, no one else can see it, even though USPTO won't look at it for a year. So it's kind of invisible for a year. At a year, you then have a choice if you want to make it proceed with it, then you make it a non-provisional, and then it's kind of published and it's searchable, and so people can figure out what is being patented, even if it's a patent pending. Then you go through a number of processes. So the initial steps I've described so far are with the USPTO. About 18 months after that, so 18 months after 21st May 2025, you would have you'll be faced with an option of what's called a worldwide filing. It's called a PCT filing. And so then you decide, okay, I'm in the US, I'm filing. Do I also want to file in the world, right? In the EU, in the UK, in Japan, China, Korea, India, whatever your major markets might be. And then you make those choices, you select your countries, and then that's the next step. And then you kind of can just be in the queue, right? Because obviously every patent office will then take it up in the order that they receive it, and then they'll look at it and they'll respond with what are called office actions, where they'll say, oh, we like these claims, these look fine, but we reject the other claims. And then the claims that they reject, if they're important, you can then respond and say, well, we think that, you bring up good points, but the way we see it is this, or this is our rebuttal. And so you basically kind of argue your way into getting what you hopefully want. There is a way to accelerate this process, which is called a fast track filing. I think it's called the track one, where you pay a little extra money. I think it's like something like $4,000. And you can, at least in the US, and then you can get much faster approval. So I believe that gets you within a year or 2 years, you get a decision from the PTO. That doesn't mean the decision will be yes, but you'll get a decision. And so their responses are more accelerated. You should be more agile with your response as well. And so that's what we actually did for our acne patent. And that's what we probably do for our other patents as well.
So for everyone listening or watching this, I mean, we should say that they should be patient, right? They should be patient because it is a long process, but they should start right away if they want to patent something. So amazing. Okay, so I want to discuss now what we typically discuss here on the show, which is customer acquisition and retention. And I'm super excited to discuss that with you because I know it's going to be a super interesting conversation. So first off, I want to say that of course, we are in a context in which everything is more expensive, including acquiring customers, right? So I wanted to ask you if you're noticing the same thing. Is that happening to you too? And in that case, what are you doing to tackle that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, and this will ring true for pretty much everyone who's listening and who has kind of that kind of business. Customer acquisition costs have been increasing. CPAs are getting higher, CPMs are getting higher, and now there's, I think, even more uncertainty because TikTok, which is this burgeoning advertising platform, that a lot of small businesses and brands have been figuring out how to monetize, is now facing headwinds because there's been legislation to sort of ban it. Um, and so, I think in the face of that, our response has been, and I think that's a response of most people, is to really seek efficiencies in a couple of ways, right? Obviously, which is acquisition, which is what you're talking about, but retention is the other lever that's really important for us. And because of the product that we have, that is acne, right? Because acne is a chronic disease. It affects you for months and years, and you need something that can deal with it on that time scale. Our business, our approach is actually well suited to pull that retention lever a lot more. But I'm sure we'll talk about that at some point. But just focusing on your question about the acquisition, we've realized we keep testing obviously different messaging and different approaches and see what sticks, right? So we know that people's attention is very precious and you need to land that punch early. What we've learned early on is that the science of what we're doing is actually very high converting, whether it's on the first click or in the landing pages and even up to the last click, or not exactly the last click, but like leading up to it. It just helps to kind of keep engagement and people going through the funnel. So we've tested this out in many, many different ways. And although that is kind of the winning strategy, what we've realized is that we need to refine it. Because, as a biotech company, and certainly for me as a scientist, I'm guilty of this, number one, which is we have a lot of science behind our product, right? And we want to say all of it. And obviously, in the attention economy, you can't, there isn't enough time for you to talk about, give a little TED talk and expect people to still be there. People are sort of whizzing by and swiping past. And so for us, the challenge now is that we've been working on, which is really exciting actually, is how do we take our science and sort of distill it, right? And maybe make a hierarchy of like, what is it you need to know first? And then if you're interested and you click in, what's the next piece of information? What's the next? And kind of leave breadcrumbs that make not just sense as oh, this is science, this makes sense, but like as a story, right? Like I have acne, I'm coming to you because I'm interested. So that first click is basically like, yes, I'm kind of raising my hand, I have acne. And then you're kind of following the breadcrumbs. So how do we make those breadcrumbs as delicious and enticing as possible? And then, obviously there are many tactics that are pretty well worn to have fresh creatives, cycle through them, kind of have a cadence to what you're talking about. And I guess the last thing in acquisition that we're focused on is kind of breaking down our customers right into personas and focusing the message on them, because you can have a very relevant and persuasive message, but that can be relevant and persuasive for a certain subset and not as relevant for another subset, whereas another message will be more relevant to them. And so kind of breaking down those personas and focusing them as separate verticals that then ultimately integrate because they're all buying a product, right, in our shop. But kind of looking at the funnel through that way, through a little bit of bifurcation, but then a commingling at the end.
So everything you said was really interesting, and I wanted to add a few things. One, um, you said something about, how do we mention the science behind it? And I know that I don't know if it's a third or seventh grader, but brands should talk simply and talk like a seventh or third grader. I don't remember which one of those, but the point is they need to be speaking in simple terms to the audience. So if you mentioned all the science behind it in complex ways, you turn people off and you lose them, as you said, the attention era that we are going through right now. Like you have probably a fraction of a second to get their attention, and probably it's not through science, but through the things that motivates them, the internal benefits. So for instance, you solve an external problem, which is acne. How does that make them feel is probably the internal problem. Insecurity, they feel, I don't know, I'm just making it up. They feel ugly, they feel insecure, uncomfortable, it itches or whatever. So you're solving that and probably addressing the internal factors like benefits, fears, etc., is what will resonate with the audience the most. I don't know if that's what you're doing or not. I honestly haven't checked it out, but it's what probably many brands should do. And of course, you said uh, um, the last thing I will add, the consideration phase. The first step is saying, hey, the problem awareness. As you said, I have acne. Amazing, great. And then, okay, this product sounds like it's something for me, but why this product over the competitors? So that's probably the part in which you need to go heavier on the differences. I know you have that on your website, even. That's a good ad for brands that don't have that. Just in case, I'm looking at your website now, and I'm not showing this in video for everyone listening to it. I will describe just in a sec. they have a chart, and in the columns they have the Phyla, the company and the competitors in separate columns, and in the rows the benefits or resolves acne, zero side effects, kills acne bacteria, etc. So they have like either a check or a cross mark, right? So that's a good ad for your website that can be translated into ads too.
Yeah, and you're right. We're focusing on all of those, and it's a good thing you talked about the third or seventh grader because I have two boys and who are rising seventh graders, and so they're gonna hear a lot of marketing messaging over the next year to see if it makes sense. They can be my guinea pigs.
Oh yeah, I do the same thing with my and no kidding with my I have twins, a boy and a girl. They are about to turn 5. So it's
Hmm.
even I don't honestly I don't test, let's say I don't tell them anything about my job or marketing or whatever or ad messaging, but I do challenge myself on purpose to talk simpler because I know for a fact that whenever I would explain something for adults whenever I talk to them, it's like, okay, so probably how would I explain this to a 5-year-old? And that comes to mind when I'm working and writing stuff. So yeah, being a
Hmm.
parent have some pros after all, right? We don't sleep, but yeah, after all, we get benefits.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
And then there's another phase in that, let's say, conversion funnel or the customer journey. It's probably especially for your industry, among others, which is the activation phase. Some people are more motivated than others to use what they buy, you know, but in some ways, in this case, for replenishable products, in which, they need to start using it to get more of it, or even buy more of, I don't know, complementary products, you need to kind of educate them to then activate them, at least to some of them. I don't know if many or not so many, depending on each company. Are you guys doing anything specifically for this?
You mean activating before the first purchase, activating after the first
After.
purchase to
After.
after? Yeah. Well, it's funny you say that because that has actually been a big focus of ours over the last year and a half, and it's shown pretty amazing results. And so essentially, we know that if the product performs, right, people will be inclined to buy it a second time, right? Bottom line. And that's probably generally the case for every product. If the product works, if you like it, you buy it a second time. Um, for the product to work, for in our case, compliance is very important, right? If you don't apply it twice a day on your face, regularly, then you're not going to see the results. And what we were seeing was that a lot of people who are like, oh, this didn't work, returns, the first question obviously we asked was, did you use it twice a day, every day for 60 days to see the initial results? And most of them were like, oh, no, I didn't, or like, oh, I didn't know I had to. So for us, firstly, that was the problem to solve was how do we ensure compliance? And then B, how do we make it like really short? How do we hammer home that message? So it involved us simplifying a lot of our like packaging and like the inserts with our packaging to have just one monotonous, drilled take home message, which was this, and this alone, right? And then thinking forward to our product where we say, oh, so many of our customers see great results in the first 60 days, which is when they use the first product, right? And then they're wondering, oh, I think my acne is under control. Do I need to still use it, right? And so then towards the end of their first use, there's like an email drip campaign that's like, hey, these are the benefits of using Phyla long term, right? It's not just taking care of your acne, it's about balancing your microbiome, it's about better complexion, it's about long-term skin health. And so we have, these are two examples of like a few layered messaging that we have that then make them prone to activation for the next step so that when they're ready to either make the decision to maybe enter a subscription or they're already in a subscription, right? They're not thinking of jumping off. They're just like, oh yeah, why would I touch that? That looks fine. This is for my skin health. I understand that.
Right. And what's the main channel you're leveraging to activate or let's say educate people after their first order? Is it email through a post-purchase sequence or is it long-form video, both?
Um, I think primarily it's a bit of all of those, right? And we have different touch points, but I think the most um push we've made was on the email campaigns, right? Because we have their emails. Um, and acne sufferers are pretty strongly motivated, right? Like they pay attention to their acne and what they're taking for it and how it's working. And so we feel like there's high engagement. And then we've got a few sort of layers of tech on top of that of how to make the email campaign more personalized, more relevant, more value driven, right? Not just of us saying, hey, we're Phyla, just emailing you to make sure you know we exist. And remember you bought that product 3 weeks ago. We're still here. That's not high value. So giving people value, whether it's something about FAQs or science or things you didn't know or how to use it or you know things that like especially in a vertical, right? So for example, if you're selling to women who are pregnant who have hormonal acne, right, or breastfeeding moms, then they're probably very focused on the safety of the product, right?
Right.
And if you're talking to someone who's tried everything, has had acne for many years, they're probably worried about the side effects and the long-term kind of skin damage component. So it's pieces like that where you kind of highlight that and you double down on that. And you know, we keep testing and learning through that as well.
Right. You said before that you go heavy on retention, or it's something really important for you guys, and it's not something normal. You know, many brands neglect reject retention. They focus mainly on acquisition, and all they want is acquire new customers, and that's all they want to put the money on and the efforts they do. So I'm happy to hear that retention is something big for you guys. So what do you do on that front?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll start by saying that you know, that's what you've described is actually probably normal. I'm not going to say it's good or bad because, you know, you have, especially at an early stage, you're at a point where you need a customer base, right? So you just need to acquire customers. You can't have 100% retention on zero, a customer base of 0 or 10 people, right? So initially, like you have to get that engine, that flywheel going, but then pretty soon you realize that if you have a leaky bucket, then pouring more water into it is less efficient than plugging up the leaks, right? And so retention of your customers at a point, and depending on your trajectory, that could be earlier or later, you start saying, oh, I need to divert resources from customer acquisition to this. And I will say that, you know, I think we've kind of lived through this as a brand, which is up until recently, up until a few years ago, right? Getting customers acquired was relatively cheap. And so retention didn't matter as much. And also for a couple of reasons, right? Because A, you could just acquire customers cheaply and slap them on top of whatever you have right now. And the retention was fine. You just, whatever, you just factored that into your P&L, right? And the second was that VCs, if you were a venture backed company, VCs were encouraging you to do that. They were like, don't worry about retention. We'll figure that out at some point, but we want you to acquire. We want you to grow at all costs, right? And that's a great way to set money on fire. Um, so, you know, post 2022, when we find ourselves in an area where you know acquisition costs are much higher, and that's across the board, it's kind of unavoidable in this sector. You've got to really focus on retention. Our retention has been very successful. We're sort of north of 50% now, which for our category is kind of world beating. Um, and it's kind of almost doubled from where we were probably 18 months ago. So that's pretty, it's a significant number, and starting from where we started, that, it was pretty good progress. Um, and yeah, and in retention, it's just focusing about education, value, and of course, it starts number one with a product that works.
It's meant to say that exact same thing. That having a great product is key. Otherwise, we cannot discuss anything else, right? It doesn't make sense. So having a great product is a must always, but even more now. I mean, these days. So you said 50% retention rate, more or less. Okay, and you mentioned earlier that you do subscriptions. You offer subscriptions. So could you
That's
please
right.
talk about that for a minute, if you don't mind? Like pros and cons of doing subscriptions, what technology, if you want to name it, do you use, or which tools do you use? Anything, any advice you have for people looking to, starting offering a subscription for the customers?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the subscription model is very attractive, right? Because then you're not tirelessly trying to acquire customers who then fall off, and then you build like this really sweet recurring revenue base, right? And that, for obvious reasons, is really beneficial for the business, not just for, oh, that's fewer people I have to acquire every month, but then that makes your growth a lot easier because you just have that recurring revenue base, and the more customers you acquire, the bigger you make that pool, the more of them, as a percentage kind of slot into that recurring revenue, and then you're just pumping that through. Um, for our product, obviously it makes a lot of sense. For many other products, you'd have to kind of figure out whether subscription makes sense. And then I would say that if you're in a sort of product that doesn't make sense to offer a subscription version, then it may not be worth your while trying to push people really hard, or devote resources into trying to get them to make that decision, because then it won't pay off for you, and you'll end up annoying people with unnecessary friction, right? Yeah, the reason why we initially started subscription was because recognizing that people with acne suffer for it for many years. They need something that they can, use for years and years. So that makes a subscription model really important. And then as we uh, went, we were acquiring customers, and we realized that we need to focus on retention. Subscription was obviously like a really powerful part of that. The main component, the main pillar of retention. Um, and so, yeah, there are some very well-worn tactics you can use, right? Which is like offering a discount on subscription, offering different perks if you can, offering more support and enticement, right? So we have a program called Phyla Plus, where you have unlimited access to a dietitian and an esthetician, so you can discuss your skincare regimen. You get that support. It's pretty like it's like a concierge service, right? So you pick up the phone or you email, and you have like any question. Oh, I have this new product I'm trying to thing, or what do these ingredients mean? Is this good? Is this compatible? All of these questions can be answered by that service. And so there are subscription services, then you can have add-ons. And for us, we really focus on having a small number of SKUs, but providing a really high amount of value, right? So we're not out here to confuse you or smoke and mirrors you or trick you into adding 3 or 5 things into your cart. We personally don't think you need that many products. And part of the problem of why people's skin is so irritated is that they use maybe too much instead of just what the skin needs and not more. So it's kind of like marrying the ethos of your brand, your products, your company into whatever pillars you're using for retention, subscription for us is the main one. And then focusing on, you have to see it from the side of the customer too, because if you start doing that, I think then you build a business where customers will come back and they see it themselves as part of your brand.
Right. Do you or are you guys profitable on the first order, or do you look to be profitable on the, let's say, second, third order?
Right now we're profitable between the second and the third purchase, and we're moving. And so right now we are profitable for every customer we bring in, on a, you know, orders basis, not on a company-wide basis.
Yes.
So we're marching towards that. And as we increase our customer base, retain our retention, obviously we'll be looking to take that up into the 60s. And then focusing on not just the second purchase retention, but the third purchase, fourth purchase, right? Make that long tail fatter. Um, that's kind of our strategy to march towards overall company profitability.
I think it's a balance between two things. One is, of course, the compound effect of the whole thing, as you said. It's not about only the second purchase, but the third, fourth, and so on. But then it's also about cash flow, right? I mean, let's face the truth, like companies need to pay the bills, need to survive, and for that, they need to be profitable as soon as possible. The problem is that many companies are trying to focus so much. I mean, it's good that they focus on being profitable in the first order, but probably they are trying to approach it the wrong way. So since they can't be profitable in the first order, instead of trying to take a look at the, I don't know, at the offer, how to improve it, probably pre-purchase upsells or post-purchase upsells for whatever they can do to improve it, or bundles, whatever, they focus on the wrong stuff. They I don't know, they start allocating budgets to different acquisition channels and testing whatever, but what they should be testing, So again, I know it's necessary for brands, but the long term view, whenever possible, of knowing that it's a long term game, and sometimes, as you said, you can be profitable in future orders and not the first one, is something that these days uh, is a reality for most brands.
Yeah, and I want to kind of highlight what you just said, because if we were talking a couple of years ago, then at least like venture-backed startups, right? We were being told the exact opposite thing, right? They were like, don't worry about retention, don't worry about profitability, just acquire customers, just show growth. And honestly, most like people who you would have on 2 3 years ago would just be talking about growth, growth, growth. I'm obsessed with growth, see how my company is growing. That's my primary KPI for measuring success, right? Now, of course, the tune has changed, but I kind of want us as kind of whatever, business owners, entrepreneurs, to pull ourselves out of that and really say to yourself, do I want to exist? Do I want my business to be viable in the next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, right? And the only way to do that is to get to profitability as soon as possible, which may not mean tomorrow or next week or next month or 6 months from now, but that you have a plan and you say, oh, I can survive that long and I will hit that. And I will, once I'm profitable, not only then is that, oh, it's the fashion for venture funds to say, oh, are you profitable? Then that's a tick mark. But for a company selfishly, you're like, if I'm profitable, that kind of changes the game, right? Because then I have a lot more optionality. I'm not forced to take working capital. I'm not forced to take this. I can say no to a lot more offers because they don't make, good business sense to me than I would if you're like, oh, shoot, I just got to take this because I have no choices. So being profitable opens up so much choices for you. It allows you to plan for the future. It allows you to make decisions in a more rational and I think level-headed way. And I think it's hugely important. So that's definitely something that we pay a lot of attention to.
One of the last questions I have for you is, if you had to start the company again, what would you do differently?
Yeah, I mean, I started the company when my kids were a year old, 2 years old. And you have young kids as well, and so it's really hard, not just being an entrepreneur and a business owner, but having, raising a family. And you, of course, never want to put that on hold for other things because, you have to, your life matters too. And so, I've been dealing with, and I think a lot of my fellow entrepreneurs who I talk to are also like that, right? You're busy, you're chasing this and chasing that, and there's barely enough time to get work done. And then you have to, take care of your family and you want to spend time with them. And so I've taken a lot of steps over the last few years to try to get better mental health, get better work-life balance, get just carve out time for yourself that is constructive instead of because I am more than anyone, guilty of like doom scrolling or being on, consuming social media too much. So I think part of that is I would say everyone should really take care of their mental health and make sure that they have enough space for their own well-being, whether it's physical, whether it's mental. Ideally, you should have both because I think both are really important and work hand in hand. And so I've been reading this book more recently called Do Nothing. It's written by Celeste Headley, and she's, someone who worked for NPR for many years. She's a famous journalist. And so she was like, I thought that early in my career, I'd have to just work, work, work to make my career, right? And then she was like, I got really successful. And so I decided to become self-employed. And then I thought my work-life balance would get better, but it actually got worse because she had all these bad habits that were ingrained in her. And so reading this book has been really interesting of like how do you make sure that your work or your life isn't gobbled up by work, and how do you emerge from that and build a more meaningful life. And so the book is called Do Nothing. I think it's really important. It's really cool. It's not a very long read, but I found it really interesting.
Love it. I just saved it because I love those type of books. I'm all about, growing a business in my case currently my agency, but also about being a present dad. I probably stopped working to go pick up my kids from school even though my wife goes to, and then I come back and I continue working for a few hours and then I take them to soccer or whatever they go, and whatever they do I want to be there for them. I know that many entrepreneurs are, I mean, before kids, I don't know, I was a night person. I used to work I don't know, until late hours, and my wife
Mhm.
was fine with that, and she's great. But then when I had kids, you see them grow, especially through the pandemic. It was super tough for us, the pandemic, but then you have the chance to see them grow. You're at home more, and you realize how valuable life is, and work is valuable too, especially what you're doing, like discovering new things that help people a lot. It's great and super valuable, and you're leaving a legacy, right? But family is a legacy too. And of course, as you said, it's a balance. Nobody's perfect. We are always working on that. And books like these probably are a step towards being better on both fronts.
Yeah, absolutely. And a couple of years ago, especially as you face ups and downs in your business all the time. And there was a time when I was just working really hard, and my kids would come after lunch or after dinner and say, "Hey, Dad, do you have time to play a board game or just play cards or chat or whatever?" And I'd be like, "Oh, sorry, I have too much work," and it was very painful for me to say that, but I would say it. And sometimes it becomes kind of a crutch where you're just like, oh, I could work or I could spend time, but I'm exhausted and I kind of can't just play with my kids or run after them, so I'll just do this work. And I was like, okay, you got to stop saying that. So now whenever my kids are like, hey, Dad, do you want to play, do you want to do something, I'm like, yes, always, absolutely, because I can always find other time to work, but this is the time that they're awake, that they're engaged, that they're not in school, and you need to spend time and enjoy that.
And then when they grow up and become teenagers, probably they won't want to hear about us pretty often. So we need to make the most of these these
I know,
time.
man. I'm almost there. My kids are 12. So I'm sure that's very soon. They're incredibly sweet and very affectionate still, but I see their friends, and like from what parents tell me, they're like, yeah, it's about to change.
Uh, yeah, I have a few years ahead of that, luckily, but yeah, time will come, and as far as they say, pretty fast. So,
Yeah.
it was amazing to have you here. I had a lot of value, and I'm sure the audience too. Before you go, I just wanted to ask you where people listening and or watching this can go to learn more about you and Phyla.
Yeah, so we are Phyla, Phyla, and you can find us at phylabiotics.com. That's where we have our products, of course, but also the science and the clinical trial that we ran. So a lot of data about our technology and how it's different from how you treat your acne. Yeah, we're on the socials at Phylabiotics on, Twitter, X, Meta, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, etc. So check us out.
Amazing. Yeah. So as always, for those listening or watching this, everything is at the DTCinsider.com. If you are not already there, if you go to the episode link, you will see all the show notes, including the book he mentioned, as well as the social handles for Phylabiotics. You again, it was a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here and drop these value bombs that you dropped.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it.